Thank you for coming today for our brown bag lunch featuring our adjunct professor, Ronnie Gipson. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He heads the aviation and business law practice at Gipson, his own law firm. His experience includes transactional work, litigation, and he represents companies in breach of contract disputes, trademark copyright infringement claims, premises liabilities claims, personal injury, wrongful death, a lot involving the aviation industry. He is a member of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association Legal Panel and the Experimental Aircraft Association's Legal Advisory Council. In addition, he is a member of the Lawyer Pilots Bar Association, the Aviation Insurance Association, the International Air Transport and Safety Bar Association, and is an adjunct professor here at GGU. So all of those organizations, potential networking opportunities for all of you, which is wonderful. He earned his bachelor's degree from Texas A&M, his law degree from USF. During law school, he served as a judicial extern to Magistrate Judge Maria Elena James at the District Court. And he will, I'm sure, share all of those experiences with you, as well as tell you a little bit about aviation law and the class that he is offering next semester, which hopefully our little chat today will pique your interest. So I will turn it over to you to kind of keep this as formal or informal as you'd like.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I really appreciate it. I'm glad everyone was able to show up today. And what I want to do is I really want to keep it as informal as possible. And I'm one of those folks that I move around. So sorry, I'm going to be one of those moving targets. What I'd like to do is tell you just a little bit about myself. We're going to go back a little bit before undergraduate because it's important and it actually informs the aviation law practice. I was born and raised in a city called Austin, Texas. The airport, the municipal airport for Austin, Texas was located in the city. It was about 10 minutes from downtown. And my grandmother's house was located underneath the approach to the western runway. So when I, as a kid, stepped out into my backyard, passing overhead were aircraft from American Airlines, Delta, Braniff, Texas International, Southwest. And the really neat thing for me is that as a kid, it's hot, it's Texas, you're out there in shorts and no shoes. I'd wave to the pilots and they'd wave back. That's how close they were because they were seconds away from landing. So that love of aviation started at a very young age. It's because I saw it every day, every 10 to 15 minutes. So that's how that got started. Well, it stuck with me, and I was selected to participate in an internship program in high school in Richardson, which is North Dallas, and they placed me with Southwest Airlines. So I went to work for Southwest Airlines as a high school student, and I rotated through all the different departments, seeing what it is an airline does. And I got placed with it was the marketing department. And the marketing department did a quick trip down to Austin one day. I went with them. Went, serviced some accounts, we came back to the airport, and we were getting ready for the flight back up to Dallas Love Field. And the pilot came out, and he was stretching his legs. So I started talking to him, and it turned out he asked me a pivotal question. He said, "How are you going to pay for college?" And I said, "I have no idea." He said, I may have a solution for you. Here's my card. Call me when you get back to Dallas." That guy, Captain Art Jarvis, actually was a recruiter for the U.S. Navy. He helped me get a fully paid scholarship to Texas A&M University based on that interaction in the Austin airport that lasted less than 10 minutes. So when it comes to devotion to Southwest Airlines, yeah, pretty high up there. So that's how I got to Texas A&M on a full naval scholarship. After leaving Texas A&M, I served for 4 years during the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, doing counter-drug operations in the Caribbean. After leaving that job, I went to work for Stanley Tools, Garage Door and Hardware in New York as a district sales manager. And I didn't really like that job because there was no flying, there was no travel, and there was a lot of people complaining at me all the time. And the people that I worked with didn't work for me, so I couldn't tell them what to do. So it was nothing like the Navy. I just didn't like it at all. And it's very funny because it's the culmination of a lot of fortuitous circumstances. Living in New York and living in New Jersey, in the wintertime you get what? Snow, right? I saw an ad in the newspaper for interviewing to become a flight attendant for United Airlines. I said, I'm never going to get this. Hundreds of people show up to these things. I've got nothing else better to do. I don't feel like going to work that morning. I'll go. The night before, there was a blizzard. At these cattle calls, you normally get, I'm serious, 300 plus people showing up to these events. That day, there were 7. I got called in for a second interview and flown to Chicago, and I got offered a job as a flight attendant for United, which I took. So I went from Stanley Tools to becoming a flight attendant for United Airlines and started on April 21st, 1996. And I stayed with them for about 7 years, definitely learning the aviation industry from the airline standpoint, from the standpoint of being a labor union employee, which I didn't really like, and it definitely grated against my nerves quite a few times, especially when I took out the union dues out of my paycheck. But it was a very informative process, especially coming to understand how an airline functions and how they make their money. So it was good because it's on the path to creating who I am. I used that job to actually fund my way through law school. The first 2 years I was a flight attendant while I went to law school. I flew at night and on the weekends. And I'm sorry, I went to school at night and I flew on the weekends and studied during the day. So it worked out. After graduating from law school, I went to work for a maritime law firm here in the city, which is very interesting because federal aviation law is so new as a body of law that they actually based it on maritime law. So the transition from maritime into aviation was actually a very clean segue, and it's a good solid foundation. After leaving the maritime law firm, I went to work for a large litigation firm over in the East Bay where I litigated complex and class action cases. And I wasn't having any fun because I wasn't around planes, I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, so I decided to leave. And I took someone with me, another associate, because he wasn't happy. He wanted to be a criminal. He wanted to get back in the courtroom and represent criminals in court. So we started our own boutique firm. So that's, as Suzanne mentioned, that's what I do. I do a lot of business transactions, business consultation, and litigation on behalf of business owners. And my subspecialty is aviation. So everything I do for my business clients, I do for my aviation clients. And what's interesting about it is, just as a regular attorney, you're not going to pick up those clients if you're not in that industry. They have this mindset that they don't want to deal with you if you're not a pilot. Okay? So that's what happened there. That's how I got to where I am today. So now what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about what is aviation law and sort of broad stroke where we're going in the course, and then give you the opportunity to ask questions. And there are going to be a couple of points in here where I show some videos. And before I get to the videos, one of the videos is about a catastrophic event where there's loss of life. In this particular segment of the law, the attorneys involved are usually pilots. And so we approach these scenarios from the aspect of a great degree of respect, because there's been a loss of life, because there's been a culmination of facts or factors that were beyond the control of someone. So we don't necessarily approach it from the normal civil litigation aspect of let's attack, and be ferocious about it. Because we really try to be respectful, because there, but for the grace of God, goes us. Okay. So that's one of the things that we're also going to emphasize in the course, is the way to look at these things dispassionately and still apply the legal rubric. Okay, aviation law, overarching question, what is it? Automatically, when you say aviation industry, aviation law, you think airlines, right? Right? Okay, well, the airlines, and that's good, it's a good assumption, the airlines contribute $1.3 trillion to the U.S. economy. Okay? Aviation as an industry, it's 1.5 trillion. Okay, and that remaining amount from that contribution comes from what we call general aviation. And what is general aviation? Well, general aviation is the combination of corporate aviation and individual pilots who fly for both pleasure and business. Okay? And it's important to make that distinction because people may not always understand that if you go out and work with a company like Google, Google has an aviation department. Okay? So when it comes time for Google to talk about counsel, they need counsel that is proficient with being able to handle the corporate aviation side, because they fly under a very specific type certificate and there are rules that they have to adhere to. And it's very easy to get to run afoul of those regulations. I've got a video here. Let's see if I can get this to work. It normally won't work for me. We go through all this prep and it never works. It hates me. Okay, that's okay. I've got a backup. It's always a sign of a good pilot. Here is my backup.
You have a checklist.
I had a checklist and a backup. And what I want to show you is, this is a video of a landing. And I'm flying. My wife is in the back seat. My infant son is in the back seat with her, and we have a guest in the front seat in the right. And we flew up to Sacramento for lunch, to have lunch with family and friends. And I want you to watch this, and I want you to take a note of where the airport is located and look at what's around the airport. Okay, because there's so much, there's so many different legal issues when you look at this picture, and it drives the direction that we're going to take the course. So, in addition to showing off an awesome landing, so you see this is a very residential area. Okay, we've also got some industry here, and we're looking out to the right of the plane. So the airport is to the left, and in a couple of minutes, my wife will switch the camera to the other side. The reason she's looking this way is there's a helicopter that moves down the right side. So it's kind of difficult to see when we're looking for the traffic, so to speak. It's Sacramento, it's bumpy, it's warm. It's okay. There's the airport. We found it.
Was this SAC exec?
SAC executive, yes. We're going to fly a standard left-hand pattern. That's the runway we're going to land on. We're going to fly that way. We're going to make a turn to the left, and we're going to make another turn to the left and come and set it down on the runway. But again, notice how you've got the edge of the airport here, and through zoning, they've built all the way up to the edge. You're very close to the runway. Even though there's this big open field over here, they've built all the way up to the runway. But notice what this is. This is a trucking facility. Okay, shipping, cargo. That's important, especially at Sacramento Executive. And it does start to smooth out as we get lower. See what's really close there? An industrial park again. And then more residents and houses. Tell you that this was actually a very smooth landing and descent into the airport compared to what we encountered when we got back to Hager. Okay, so there we are. We've rolled out and we're on what we call our final approach. So we're lined up with the runway, we're on a stabilized approach, and the runway comes into view right about now. There we go. Focus. We're down. Not bad. And then there's a mad frenzy to get the windows open because it's so hot. Okay. But what's important about that video, and seriously, it's not the landing, but what's important about that video, well, it is, we live, right? When you look at how that airport is situated, the houses are extremely close to the airport. I think you'd agree with that, right? It's one of the major problems with general aviation today. Because general aviation, and I just told you, general aviation consists of corporate and personal flying, okay? The companies that use an aircraft as a business tool do that because they need to be able to get from point A to point B without having to connect on the airlines from Chicago, Dallas, Houston, New York, whatever. They use it as a resource. It's a tool to help them do business more efficiently. There we go. Okay. So when you have residential encroachment on the airport property, it brings up a lot of land use issues. Okay? You end up getting into a lot of regulatory fights about letting the residents continue to encroach on the airport property and what you can and can't build. And there's a lot of lobbying that goes on by some of the groups that I'm a member of to stop that encroachment and keep those airports open. Because once an airport is gone, it's gone forever. Okay? And when an airport goes, a community loses its ability, its lifeline, to the rest of the world. So, for example, in the United States, I think that there are probably 100 or less airports that the airlines actually serve. Okay? The rest of the airports, the rest of those communities rely on being able to get people to business meetings, move cargo. Okay? They rely on airports like Sacramento Executive. Okay? So it is no mistake that that huge cargo facility where you saw all the trucking was located so close to Sacramento Executive. That is by design. You see that from time to time. Okay. Well, general aviation aircraft. So we've broken it down into individual and corporate. What is it? Well, fixed-wing airplanes, helicopters, balloons, dirigibles, and gliders. Okay. And general aviation, as a subset, the activities include the manufacture and operation of aircraft, or piston engines and of non-powered aircraft. It's flights related to business or corporate transportation of people or cargo, and personal transportation. There's a segment out there of individual people like myself who want to get from point A to point B, and they don't like driving on 80. They don't like flying the airlines. They'd much rather be in the comfort of their own plane and getting there. General aviation also covers air ambulance flights, flight training, and many purposes such as fire spotting and suppression and pipeline control. Let's see if we can make this one work. Probably not. It's okay, I have a backup. All right, so this is, I set that foundation there. Now I want to talk about the other side, the more popular side, and the claims that come up with respect to airlines. The media will always pick up and sensationalize an airline crash. And airline crashes are important to the aviation industry for two reasons. One, they usually give us a technological advance that makes the whole process of flying safer. And second, it almost always results in a change in the regulations. And the implementation of that change takes years. Okay? And to be able to help your clients adopt that change and put it into place, they need legal counsel to do it. And in the course, we're going to spend an entire module on the enforcement process that the FAA has to punish and penalize people and entities when they don't comply. And they do that because there's such a propensity for the loss of property damage and the loss of life and personal injury. And this example, this air crash that I'm referring to here is Aeromexico 498. On August 31st, 1986, an Aeromexico DC-9 from Mexico City was flying to LA. It was on the descent to land at LAX, and the aircraft actually had a mid-air collision with a general aviation aircraft that had taken off from a feeder airport close to LA, and it was headed up to Big Bear. And what you're going to see is, and I'm not going to play it for very long, but there's an element in here where there's alleged negligence on the part of air traffic control, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Let's do this.
Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, is one of the busiest in the world. It's used by 40 million passengers each year. More than 1,500 planes take off and land every day. It's August 31st, 1986, Labor Day weekend. As Estrada leaves on her errand, Aeromexico Flight 498 is just 20 minutes from LA. Captain Antonio Valdez-Prom is acting as co-pilot as they approach the city. First Officer Jose Valencia is piloting this leg of their journey.
Now I'm going to fast forward it.
Is still a few minutes from their first contact with air traffic controller.
Los Angeles approach. Good morning. This is Aero Mexico 498. Aero Mexico 498, Los Angeles approach. 25 left, final approach course. Do you have information?
The jet is now officially inside what's known as the Terminal Control Area, or TCA, sometimes referred to as the birdcage. The TCA.
Okay, now, this is important because due to federal regulations actually define what airspace is. And around the busiest airports in the nation, you have what's now called Class Bravo airspace, which is this. They just renamed it. But it acts as an upside-down wedding cake, as we call it. So here from the airport out to a radius of about 5 nautical miles, from the surface up to 10,000 feet, it's controlled airspace. You can't enter or leave without talking to ATC. And as you go higher and get further away, the shelf diminishes. So you can be 10 nautical miles out and below like 2,500 and you're in uncontrolled airspace. That's where this other feeder airport is that the general aviation aircraft took off from. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward and get to what actually happened here. And there is a protagonist in this story. It's another aircraft that distracts the controller. There, that.
He gets a call from the Aero Mexico DC-9.
What speed do you want? We're reducing to 290. No. To 190. Okay, you can hold your sir.
White decides to give the Aero Mexico jet the runway closest to their gate.
Changing plans, sir. Stand by. Roger, 498.
With the DC-9 on hold, White turns to the intruder.
Grumman 66 Romeo, squawk 4524. Remain clear of the TCA.
So this aircraft is now in the controlled airspace he's not supposed to be. He's distracting the controller.
But he seems confused.
4, 5. What were the other two numbers?
4524. Grumman 66 Romeo, you at 4,500 now?
Negative. We're at 3,400.
Climbing. Okay, you are right in the middle of the TCA, sir.
Grumman 66 Romeo, I suggest in future you look at your TCA chart. You just had an aircraft pass right off your left above you at
5,000. And we run a lot of jets right through there at 3,500.
And I can tell you as a pilot, that conversation went on way
What do you
too long.
suggest I do now?
As the crew of Aero Mexico Flight 498 continue to close in on the airport,
Landing lights.
their DC-9 is blocked by a violent shudder.
There are bugs.
What was that?
Aero Mexico 498, Los Angeles approach.
First Officer Valencia tries desperately to control their dive.
Aero Mexico 498.
Los Angeles approach. This can't be.
A crippled DC-9 falls from the skies over Los Angeles. Fighting to control their jet, the captain and first officer have no idea what's happened to their plane.
And so essentially what happened is the general aviation aircraft that took off from the feeder airport crossed into the controlled airspace, collided with the tail of the DC-9 and took off the rudder, which disabled the pilot's ability to control the aircraft. They lost all rudder control. It was gone. So their ability to keep the aircraft level was gone. And so they entered a spin, and it went into a flat spin and crashed in Cerritos. When it crashed in Cerritos, in addition to the loss of life on the airliner, you had property damage. And in addition to that property damage, there was also loss of life on the ground. Well, from the standpoint, why do you keep doing that? Keep going. There we go. From the standpoint of looking at this from a legal analysis point of view, you have a mess because you have an international flight that is going from Mexico City to Los Angeles. And so the claims that eventually get tendered for compensation to the survivors of the victims are covered by international treaties. And only through the international treaties can the airline limit their liability for wrongful death. Not so with respect to property damage on the ground. Okay, so, and there's a woman in here in this segment who loses most of her family. She loses her husband, her daughter, and one of her 2 sons. Okay, and her home is destroyed. So she has 1 son left after making a trip to the grocery store. It's tragic. And then there's another woman in here whose husband and 2 sons were on Aeromexico 498, and in an instant they were gone. So, under the international treaties, the woman who had survived with her family members on the plane, she was entitled to about $133,000 compensation from the airline for each member of her family, because it was governed by an international treaty. Had this accident occurred with a different carrier on a domestic flight, let's say from San Diego to LA, the limit of liability wouldn't have been capped. Okay, that's just one of the differences there. But we got a lot going on. We got personal injury claims on the ground, we got wrongful death claims on the ground, we got property damage on the ground. That's covered by state law. Third-party claims are going to start to come up. And we've got this element of ATC liability because we have a controller who's distracted. And what you also didn't pick up, because I didn't play it that long, is this was actually a trainee controller who was under the supervision. He was in the final phase of getting out there practicing before he was going to be released on his own. So he was doing what the training had him doing in the program, but the Federal Tort Claims Act will now come into play. We're going to talk about that. And then there's a technological advance that came out of this incident, and that is the implementation of what's called TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System. And if you want to look to see how government deals with changing technology, the aviation industry is a great place to start, because we have a lot of technology that comes out that's meant to save lives and reduce workload, and there is a very strict process for getting that type of technology into the aircraft. And what we see, the reason that we want to bring in general aviation to this course is because that technology often appears there first, before it makes it to the airlines. So after this accident, TCAS actually became much more popular in smaller aircraft before the airlines actually implemented it into the cockpit of the airliners. So what are some of the legal topics that we're going to talk about? The one that I love the most, the purchase and sale of an aircraft. It's always great to spend $500,000 on a plane. We're going to talk about FAA enforcement actions. We're going to talk about the politics and legislation that go hand in hand with the aviation industry. We're going to talk about the advocacy that occurs at the state and federal levels. We have to talk about some of the air operations, because you really need to understand what's going on and why a pilot did something in the system. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to put it into a legal context. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Federal Tort Claims Act and ATC liability. We're going to look at liability for individual pilots and companies, because they're actually different. We're going to talk about personal injury and wrongful death claims on domestic flights, personal injury and wrongful death claims on international flights. We're going to look at aviation insurance, property damage that occurs from air operations, and government agencies and their role. So one of the questions that I think, in my mind, if I was a student taking this course, would be, well, why do I want to take aviation law? How does that help me? One of the pressing questions as a law student that you have in today's economy is a job, finding a job. Airports in the state of California are controlled by counties. Does anyone know how many airports there are between Hollister and SFO, just on the west side of the bay? I think there's 7. Okay, you've got San Francisco International, you've got San Carlos, you've got Palo Alto, San Jose Reed Hillview, Half Moon Bay, San Martin, and there's another one I'm missing. But there's a lot of airports, okay, and those are all run by counties. And guess what? What?
And it's Watsonville?
Watsonville. Probably. That's probably an uncontrolled field, and I haven't been there yet. So, but there's a lot. Having a knowledge of aviation law makes you attractive to county agencies. There are federal agencies that have aviation arms, like the U.S. Customs and Immigration Department, the Forestry Service, the Department of the Interior, Agriculture, and they have to comply with federal aviation regulations just like corporate flight departments do, which also opens up another avenue. Not being able to, or having the ability to apply to the in-house counsel at Google becomes a little bit more attractive when you have knowledge about aviation law. Okay, that's it for everything I think I wanted to say, and now I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes?
Just add, in the event you have a military crash, a couple of years ago, I believe in San Diego, where you have a military aircraft going into, say, a residential area, which, what are the underlying issues there? Whose attorneys are going to be working with, what federal agencies, and does that make it more or less complicated? And, have you dealt with those kind of things?
Okay, to answer the second question first, I have not dealt with a military crash, so I can't speak from the position of I've had that experience.
Sure.
I have to do it more from an academic standpoint, being that, okay, now you've got this sovereign immunity umbrella that the government will wave like a banner. And they do that specifically with respect to the military. They're more likely to waive that and not allow you to invoke the Federal Tort Claims Act when the military is involved. So I don't know how that actually comes out, but I think you're going to have a pretty hard time getting by sovereign immunity on that one. Any questions about the content of the course and where we're going? Things, specific questions? Feel free.
You brought your FAR and AM manual. Is that something that will be part of the course?
I'm not going to ask you to buy it because you don't need to buy it. You've got the references in the library. They're basically the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 14 CFR, and then the different parts. So we start with 23, 25, 61, 91, 125, 135, 121. Yeah. So they're there, and when that becomes necessary, I'll make a reference to it, and you can go online or go to the library and get it. Because it's only $7, but why? If it's free, why would you need to spend $7? So, yeah, good question though. I have chosen a course book. It's Aviation Law by Professor Wendy Davis, and I went through a lot of case books before I finally chose hers. And the reason that I chose it is because it's not a course that's entirely slanted toward the airlines. She gets into all these different topics, and she has a much, I think, clearer view of what the aviation industry actually is. But of course, it's not perfect, and I put together a reader that goes along with it. So that's a good question. Suzanne, can you think of any questions?
Well, I have all kinds of, not so much about the course, but to the extent that students have an interest, are there, in addition to taking your course, are there other courses you recommend, administrative law or other areas? And I rattled off a lot of organizations that you're affiliated with. Are those organizations that students should be seeking out as for networking purposes, or what else can they do to groom themselves for a career in this area?
One of the things that I'm going to do in the course once we get there is I'm going to bring in my collection of magazines, which my wife will be very happy about, and distribute copies so that you can start to read these in case you haven't already done so. Because with this industry, you really need to be a voracious reader about the technological advances and the legal implications and what's going on in the industry, because it's just a harbinger of where we're going and what's going on. So that's definitely something that I think if you want to take this course, you subscribe to Flying or join the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and they actually have a pretty good discount for students. You can get in, it's like $20 or something, and you get the free magazine. So, and this one just got here, so I'm reading that. You can't have that one. It's my lunchtime reading. With respect to courses, it is a requirement that you have torts, and you have to have, I think, 1 semester of common law, because we're going to get into some federal government decision making and preemption. Federal preemption is actually really huge in aviation law, and of course, as you've seen with the airline crashes, you got to have a basic understanding of torts and the negligence actions, because we're going to build on that and start throwing in international treaties and limits of liability.
And I know you had made an offhanded reference to this earlier, and I'm wondering, is it beneficial for students to be studying labor law? It doesn't seem like that's covered under you're talking about,
Oh.
but there are all kinds of issues, as I've seen within the industry, that are
Yeah.
very union focused
And that, that's the one aspect of aviation that I actually don't do and I won't get involved in, and it's because I had my experience is colored as a union member, so I won't do it. But it takes a lot of resources to get involved and do that. So what you'll usually see is airlines and Part 135 operators that are involved with unions will tend to choose law firms that are huge and have a global presence because they need that 24/7 reactivity. And so they would never come to me because I'm not going to be available 24/7 and I don't want you calling me at 2 in the morning.
Just a quick question in regards to sort of, I guess, the breakdown of what really is encompassed in aviation law. I mean, for just looking into it myself personally, it seemed like there was a lot of, personal injury issues, more so than sort of the tort claims in regards to, or property claims. It's sort of in your experience, what's the breakdown of percentage-wise in regards to, is it predominantly personal injury? Do you focus more predominantly on, or is it more, property-related issues, things like that?
That's a good question. In practice, what I see is I see a lot of attention to the enforcement area. Okay, airmen, pilots, we call them airmen. Airmen will come to me with an alleged violation where the FAA is seeking to revoke or suspend their certificate, and they need immediate representation because they are on a very fast timeline to losing their ticket. And trust me, it takes a lot of money and a lot of time to get your pilot's license, and you don't want that to be taken away. So that is a huge portion of it, and a lot of lobbying and political efforts have been directed towards that recently. Is anyone familiar with Senator Jim Inhofe, Republican from the great state of Oklahoma? Pilot, 10,000 hours, CFI, certified, I have a tendency to do that, I apologize. Certified flight instructor, and he was flying a twin-engine aircraft a couple of years ago down to an uncontrolled field in Texas. He'd done all of his pre-flight checking the way he's supposed to, and when he went to land, he was cleared by approach control, because there is no tower. He was cleared by approach control to land, and when he came down to land, there was a maintenance crew at the edge of the runway that he had to fly beyond and land. The runway was long enough, enabling him to get down. The airport manager freaked out, called the FAA, and it was the FAA manager's, the airport manager's fault for not putting that information into the system. But he's the one who actually contacted the FAA, which resulted in an infraction, an enforcement action being pursued against Senator Jim Inhofe. Well, that wasn't really a good idea from the FAA standpoint, because what it did is it revealed all the injustices in this administrative type setting. Because the presumptions were all in favor of the FAA, they actually didn't have to turn over any evidence, and they could proceed to the hearing without turning over any of that evidence. The exculpatory evidence was actually held by Lockheed Martin, which is a subcontractor who operates the ATC facility. But they were able to stand up and say, well, we're not the government, so we don't have to turn it over. And that really angered Senator Inhofe. In conjunction with Representative Samuel Graves from the great state of Missouri, they co-authored legislation called the Pilot's Bill of Rights that basically revamped the entire process and got rid of all the injustices in it. And they got that legislation passed in less than a year, which is a phenomenal feat to get legislation through both houses of Congress and signed by the president in less than a year. I think the message there is don't piss off the senator. But and it was one of those pieces of legislation that I was very excited to be behind and very excited to now incorporate into our practice, because I'm out now doing a lot of seminars educating the pilot community on how the process has been made more fair, and we work to protect their rights. Yeah. Anything else? Nothing?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the Pilot's Bill of Rights, but I know there's been a lot of talk about, passengers' Bill of Rights, and you can't be kept on the airplane. Is that generating litigation? Is there anything that's actually coming of that's of substance?
I haven't seen that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get involved in that segment of the industry, advancing the consumer rights, because there's a lot of money with action groups that do that, and I don't see it because they wouldn't. The passengers wouldn't come to me.
Mm-hmm.
because there are limits of liability with respect to what the airline can be penalized for in those situations now.
You mentioned earlier that it was based a lot, or aviation law was initially, I think you said initially based more on maritime law. And I had some experience with that, but I was wondering, is it no longer based on that, or do you still see a lot of the same
Oh no,
parallels?
I still see a lot of it, and the reference that I would give you is, are you familiar with the Carriage of Goods and Passengers by Sea Act?
Yes.
That talks about the limits of liability on the weight of cargo on a ship.
Yes.
So if the cargo mysteriously falls over the side and then reappears in Iowa, it's only worth, X amount per pound. Same thing when you get to property damage with the transport of cargo by air. And we've got a great case I'm so excited to talk about. It's called the Vegatronic. I'm not making it up. That's actually what it's called. The name of the machine is the Vegatronic. So with the great example of how you see COGSA running throughout the way this statute is written, which was really easy for me to pick up, but I could see how that could be kind of challenging if you don't have this foundation in maritime law. Yeah.
How about dealing with like post 9/11 aviation and security? Talking about its efficiency.
You want to know how I deal with post 9/11 security and efficiency? This little blue pilot's license, where I avoid SFO in Oakland and go to my airport, get in my aircraft with my bottle of water, my video camera, and anything else that I have, and I don't interact with TSA at all. Because it's at the feeder airports, it's the airport manager's problem. Okay, so they set up security so that only owners and folks who have a purpose for being on the airport can actually get access to the flight line. So as long as I clear those initial hurdles with the business that I connect with to get to the aircraft, they've got my passport, they've got my photo ID, those type of things. So they know who's renting the aircraft. But that's the answer to your question. That's how they deal with it.
When the class, will we look at like the difference like between like the passenger, the carriers, and then the private, like, I guess I'm just, like, how is that affecting the industry, I guess? We have a lot of the complaints against the TSA. Should that actually be more privatized as opposed to?
Yeah, no, that's actually not a component of the case, of the course, because there's so much to try and get through on a macro level. And what I don't want is I don't want to get through the 14 weeks of the course and have students come out and say, man, that course is all about the airlines. Because aviation is not all about the airlines. The reason the United States has a trade surplus when it comes to aviation is because of the general aviation manufacturers. Companies like Cirrus, Cessna, Beechcraft, Lear, they make jets and they sell them overseas. These are expensive pieces of hardware, $50 million. You start adding $50 million to the GDP of a country and yeah, it's going to boost your trade surplus. If we didn't have aviation as an industry contributing to the GDP, we would be much further behind, and I think in much worse shape economically. Yeah.
Would you be talking about any of the policy kind of history that's driven like general aviation manufacturers out of the business?
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about the General Aviation Revitalization Act of 1994 and how it actually brought back companies like Cessna, Piper, and Beechcraft because they'd actually said, we've had enough. The lawsuits are killing us, no more. No mas. We're not producing another aircraft. We're not going to support them. We're done. And so that's exactly what happened. And senators had to get together and craft legislation to give them a statute of repose so that now they have 18 years of liability on an aircraft. So an aircraft that was made in, let's say they produced a new aircraft that was made in 2000. They're only responsible for a manufacturing defect to the year 2018, unless something has changed. That in the change, for example, let's say they replaced the wing, well now that wing has a new statute of repose from when it was replaced. Yeah, but that has been fantastic for revitalizing the general aviation industry because otherwise we'd have no new aircraft and we'd all be flying 40 and 50-year-old aircraft. There'd be no new aircraft to fly. Good question.
What about your practice? Can you tell us, like, is there any area of aviation law that you see more work out of than other?
Well, I the one thing I enjoy about my job is I enjoy it when someone calls me and says, I'm thinking about buying an aircraft and I'd like you to help me. Yes. Color, interior leather, cloth, what, tell me what you want. It's like, oh, you want the legal stuff. All right, fine. So, but that process is actually very closely aligned with buying a house. You have to go through all the pre-inspections, you have to set up an escrow, you have to transfer title, and it's daunting. I mean, how many of you own a house? Yeah, see, not very many people, but if you've been through that process, it's not something you do overnight, right? It's, you invest some sweat equity into getting that house, and you get your finances right through with a comb, a fine-tooth comb. Same way with a plane. And a lot of folks who've never done it before are surprised at that, and they need some legal guidance to make sure that aircraft, the loan note that they're signing or the contract that they're signing, that they're being protected. So I love it. I enjoy that. It's really sad because something actually happened where the very first aviation client I had, I helped him buy a brand new Cessna Cirrus SR-20, which is a general aviation aircraft, single engine, 4 seats, and it has a parachute. He leased it back to a flight school, which is common, and the flight school is also a flight club, so they rented it to a renter who just last weekend crashed in the desert.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and so I got a very irate client on the phone going, I want to sue him. I'm like, okay, calm down. I hear you, but let the insurance companies work this out.
Did he deploy the caps?
No, he didn't.
Couple?
No, he didn't. He didn't deploy caps, and the reason he crashed is because he didn't visually check the fuel. And he made the statement that, oh, I don't trust fuel gauges. Yeah, my client was over the roof, angry. I think he was actually spitting through the phone. I think you had a question as well, but you got cut off there at one point. Did you?
No,
Yeah.
I'm just
Well, do you want to
gonna
ask
say
one?
this.
That's what you're doing when you ask.
I don't have anything right now.
Nothing?
Sorry.
Where I got my tie, maybe? I don't know. No? Okay.
I have a question in regards to sort of the politics. Of course, you said you're going to focus on or talk about sort of lobbying and the politics for general aviation. How much of a factor is that? I know that AOPA is a big influence in politics, especially recently in regards to general aviation, sort of general aviation pilot fees or
User fees.
Yeah,
user fees is the hot topic.
So, that's one of the current events. I mean, will the course focus on a lot of the current sort of lobbying issues for general aviation, or will focus, of course, we'll probably focus on past lobbying sort of issues that have been passed or have been declined?
Well, one of the things we're going to do is we're actually going to examine the pilot's Bill of Rights, and I'm going to show you how Inhofe and Graves got it through, because that's a really interesting story. The deals that they had to broker with the whip and the Speaker of the House. And also show you EAA, which is the Experimental Aircraft Association, and AOPA, their influence, how they got involved to help move this through with white papers. And then we are going to talk about user fees, and this is very interesting because neither organization is endorsing a presidential candidate because of their stance on user fees, because neither candidate for president has actually demonstrated a clear understanding of how user fees would negatively impact flying. And as a matter of fact, President Obama has actually come out with proposals to implement user fees on a modified basis. And it's a really interesting topic. And it's interesting from that standpoint to see these advocacy groups withhold their endorsement because of it. And they have a lot of influence and power. They bring a lot of money to the table. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? I mean, I could stand up here and talk about this all day, but I've got a practice to get back to too. So yes.
Maybe one last question about networking.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you're on these boards or something, or advisory panels for AOPA and EAA.
Mm-hmm.
Are those things that people new attorneys should look at maybe getting involved in to make connections? Do you find that helpful?
If you are interested so that's a good question, and I want to answer it this way by saying that if you are thinking about adding aviation work to your practice, first you need to realize that unless you are a huge firm like Holland & Knight or Pillsbury, the aviation work is never going to be 100% of your practice. You are shooting for 20 to 30%, okay, out the gate. So unless you're working for a county or a government entity, 20 to 30% is what you're looking for. That's about the sweet spot, okay? With that in mind, I picked up my clients by flying into the airport. by having people who are my clients who are already there at the airport introducing me to the people that they know. It's a very much a referral network, and you would be surprised at the reception that let me put it this way. The reception that I got approaching the business from the flight line was 180 degrees out from the reception I got approaching the business from the parking lot. It is incredible. So if you're thinking about it and you have a passion for aviation, I strongly suggest you go get your pilot's license, because it is the admission card to the industry. For being taken seriously, and for having them do business with you. Once I actually got my pilot's license, and it was actually after about 2 years in of doing networking and referrals, it was 2 years in before I ever got invited into a couple of other organizations that I didn't even mention. So, well, that is really everything I've got. I don't want to give too much away, otherwise I'll have to give you a final exam. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that just yet. But I am looking forward to the course. It's going to be the highlight of my Thursdays from 4:30 to 6:10, I think. Hope you can sign up. Bring a friend. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to pull apart 7 of those videos. So we've got about 7 of those case studies, and it works better if we have a larger group. Otherwise, you may end up doing more than one. And I think that's going to, I'm still working that out, but I think that presentation is going to end up being about 12% of your grade. Because the skill that I want you to take away from that is being able to stand up and take a set of facts, talk about the legal application, and really perfect your public speaking. Okay? Because being able to give that type of presentation works well for you. And it's one of those skills in this age that you need as an attorney. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.